Hello everybody and welcome back. Good to talk to all of you again today, and today we are going to look at tier 6 ships for ranked. Now, this video is coming out a little bit later than I originally planned, but it's alright I guess. I'm getting to it now. Plus it is tier 6 ranked season, which is really the first time we've had tier 6, so I did kind of want to see how the meta would play out a little bit more before making recommendations. So let's get started, and how I'm going to do this is I'm going to have your S tier ships, which are like your top tier stuff, the things that you sort of should be playing. You have A tier ships, which are still very good ships with select weaknesses, and then I would say you have your B tiers, which are much more situational, and then of course trash tier, which is just ships you really shouldn't be playing. So let's start with carriers, and carriers are really easy. Ryujo is your S tier. Ryujo just has so much going for her in terms of, as a carrier, you just have so much tactical flexibility because carrier roles in ranked are kind of different than randoms, right? You're much more concerned with vision and spotting and things like that, keeping the enemy team's destroyers lit, and just providing vision for your team. So having more squadrons, more planes, and being able to contest air with fighters, especially because you have 3 squadrons versus Independence's 2, gives the Ryujo that advantage. So I would say Ryujo in 311 is definitely the S tier ship for me. Independence, well, she's the only other carrier available, and I would say maybe at best a B tier ship. Not going to just say she's trash tier because I mean someone out there could theoretically make the 201 setup work. But again, if you're up against a well-played 311, I don't really think you have a chance. So Independence, unfortunately, relegated to the B tier. Just not enough squadrons to play with as a CV for ranked. So that's the easy one out of the way. Let's look at the much more difficult to look at things, which are battleships. Cruisers are actually way more complicated as well. But let's look at battleships first. Battleships, for me, I think there's an undisputed S tier ship, and that would be Warspite. Warspite, I think, is pretty much the undisputed S tier ranked battleship for a couple of good reasons. One, her armor is much better now, although she still does take penetration damage if you show too much of a broadside, but her armor does work, and if you angle, it's alright. You do have reasonable torpedo damage reduction of 24%. Not amazing, but it's okay. But where the Warspite really shines is the guns. 381mm guns, meaning you can overmatch tier 6 battleship bows. Really useful thing. Her accuracy is really good. You have good sigma values. Her guns will perform very well. And as long as your aim is on point, you are going to be able to do quite a lot of damage with the Warspite's guns. Of course, don't forget, she's actually been buffed recently as well. So her turret traverse isn't like way back in the day where it used to take forever. I think the Warspite for me, when it comes to firepower, in terms of just being able to get shots onto target, get them there accurately, and basically not have to worry too much about battleships at tier 6 going bow in, this is your ship. Her maneuverability also is actually very good. Maximum speed 23.5 knots is actually alright. It's not the best speed you're going to get at tier 6, but it's alright, and especially because the maps aren't as big, the speed does work. Turning circle radius of 550 meters is very nice because, again, you are going to be facing off against quite a few torpedoes, so having good turning radius is quite important. And finally, her concealment, not bad at all. 13.8 stock with skills, you can get that down quite a bit more. So for me, I would say Warspite is definitely the S tier of all the battleships there at tier 6. Now, moving down to the A tier, and A tier is where battleships are still really good. Although, they do have certain flaws. And I would say Arizona quite comfortably fits in as an A-tier battleship. She has fantastic protection. Armor is very durable, but again, remember 25mm bows, which means you will get overmatched by Warspite. You will get overmatched by Mutsu, so you're going to have to be dealing with that stuff. But still, her armor is very good, and if you angle with her well, you are going to be able to mitigate a lot of damage. Arizona has very good torpedo damage reduction, 37% when all is said and done. Her main battery guns, she has, well, 12 356 millimeter guns, which means you have very, very, very heavy broadsides, and you are going to be able to get very good damage there. Also, her dispersion is okay, but her Sigma is a lot better than other of the 12 gun equipped battleships, 1.8 Sigma compared to 1.5 for the New Mexico. Quite a big difference there, meaning the Arizona's game, it's going to be able to land blocks of shells and do quite good damage. So for me, the Arizona, in terms of overall her protection and her firepower, does definitely put her up into that A-class category. Where she doesn't get to the S-class really has to do with the fact that her guns just don't match Bow-in battleships at Tier 6. Her maximum speed, 21 knots, also kind of hinders her a little bit, as it is very, very slow and it's hard for you to get to places quickly. However, again, the maps are a little bit smaller, so I think that does provide the Arizona with at least not making it like completely unplayable with its slower speed. Turning circle radius also quite good at 640 meters, and concealment's all right as well. So a very, very solid A-tier battleship. Another of the A-tier battleships, I think, for me, would probably be the Fuso. And yeah, I know some people are probably going to be like, Fuso? Why? Well, Fuso, and, Fuso has a couple of advantages. Oh, one thing I forgot as well. The Arizona, in terms of just shell penetration, so not dealing with overmatch, also is among one of the best in the Tier 6 battleships. So if you get other battleships giving you a broadside, you are going to still be able to get some quite good penetration damage. And this is probably one of the reasons why, for me, Mutsu doesn't make it into the A tier, because even though Mutsu has the overmatch on the bows, its penetration overall is actually quite poor among the Tier 6 battleships. So at range, if a battleship is angled a bit, the Mutsu shells can just shatter on belt armor, which is not that nice. So for me, yes, Arizona comfortably into the A tier. And then the other one for me would be Fuso. Fuso I've always actually really liked. This is a battleship that does reasonably well if you angle. Her armor can be quite trollish at times. Torpedo damage reduction is also quite good at 34%. This is a ship that I think is reasonably well protected if you know what you're doing with her. But also, she again has a lot of firepower. 356 millimeter guns. She's got 12 of them in total. And these guns, they do have range too, 21.8 kilometers, so make no joke, these things can be shooting at you from quite a good range away, and they can still land quite a few shells on you. Japanese battleships also have reasonably good horizontal dispersion out to range, so that means the dispersion circle is going to, horizontally favor Japanese battleships. So that's another plus. That means your shells are going to be able to lump up relatively close together, even though Fuso's Sigma is only 1.5. It's the one advantage I think Fuso has over New Mexico, is just that narrow or horizontal dispersion. Aside from that little bit, the other thing about the Fuso, I think, is the fact that her guns, they reload quite a bit faster than the Arizona and New Mexico. So if you look at like Arizona's guns reload in 35 seconds, New Mexico's reload in 34.2. Fuso can get all 12 guns out in 28 seconds, meaning very, very good DPS. So I think for me, Fuso quite comfortably is another one of those A-tier battleships. She's also got pretty good speed, 24.5 knots. Turning circle radius, however, is a little bit big, and concealment, unfortunately, is also really high, which means you will be spotted from quite a ways out. So, another A-tier battleship. Alright, so moving down, and we've got sort of like the B-tier battleships. And the B-tier battleships for me, well, I would say Mutsu. Even unfortunately I don't have her, so I'm just going to have to use the tech tree version of her. Mutsu, I think, would be one of those sort of like B-tier battleships. I personally like the ship, but she has her flaws. First of all, Mutsu's armor isn't always the most reliable thing. You will take a lot of Citadel hits. You will take those penetration hits when you're not perfectly angled. Her armor is just a little bit iffy at times. The other thing about Mutsu is that I mentioned her guns, 410mm guns. They do good damage. They just have the problem with penetration. I mean, yes, they overmatch bells, but unfortunately at range, Mutsu has one of the poorest penetrations, among the Tier 6 battleships, which really does limit her when engaging other ships at a distance. Ships like, let's say the Arizona could just show a little bit of an angled side, and Mutsu shells will just shatter. Just not ideal for me. She does have some interesting little tidbit tools, for example, like torpedoes. She does have that. She's also quite fast for a battleship, going 26.5 knots. So she does have some things going for her, but all in all, I just think that she's a lot more situational. Like, she's not one of those ships where you're like every single situation she's going to be great in. And also, I don't think she'll work for every single player that plays, tier 6 ranked. So, yeah, definitely much more of a B tier, sort of a selective situational battleship. Another one I would say at B tier would probably be the New Mexico, namely because the New Mexico's main competitor is the Arizona. The Arizona I just find to be that much better, just better dispersion on the guns, better sigma value, all that. So, the New Mexico does have many of the sort of the same advantages as the Arizona in terms of like protection, everything being quite good as well. But, just having more consistent guns of the Arizona puts her above the New Mexico. But still, I would say New Mexico, yeah, if you don't have the Arizona, you could probably use her, and she'd probably be okay. Another one of those sort of B-tier, very selective battleships, I would say, very, very selective, again, would probably be Bayern. See, Bayern, again, has many of the sort of similar advantages that the Mutsu has. She's got the guns that can overmatch, she's got reasonably good speed. Her armor is actually quite a bit better than the Mutsu's too. However, Bayern has her flaws, and her flaws happen to be pretty much identical to what the Mutsu has, which is just really shoddy dispersion at range. I mean, these are battleships that are much better getting like kind of really close, but if you're at any like further range, these two battleships just don't really perform. So I would say again, kind of a very selective kind of thing, and probably not something I would recommend using. And then finally, because I'm going to get some haters for this, I'm not a big fan of the Dunkirk. I'm not a big fan of the ship at all whatsoever. I am hesitant to fully class her as trash tier because I know there's somebody out there who's probably figured out some way to flank with this battleship and do reasonably well with her. But again, it's very, very, very sort of iffy as to whether or not you can get that kind of performance with her. She doesn't have much in terms of advantages compared to the other tier 6 battleships. Smallest guns, not ever gonna overmatch bows. Her speed is very good, 29.5 knots, but I mean, if you look at all of the other stats about her, the guns just aren't able to do that much damage. Their dispersion is kind of erratic. It's nice to have all your firepower in the front, but when you're constantly running into ships like the Warships and stuff that can overmatch your bows, just not all that great. You also have reasonably high detectability as well. It's a ship that, again, I'm hesitant to put into trash tier, although for me personally, I would say probably trash tier, but maybe somebody will make it work, so I don't know, somewhere between B and trash tier would be, I think, where the Dunkirk goes for me. And that's pretty much all the tier 6 battleships. So again, from the top, Warspite at S tier, Fuso, Arizona A tiers, B tier would be New Mexico, Bayern, Mutsu, and then somewhere between B and like trash would be Dunkirk. Dunkirk, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. All right, moving on, and let's get away from the battleships and let's look at cruisers. There is a lot of cruisers. I mean, if you look at the number of cruisers we have in the game, there is a ton. And that means there's a lot of selection. And for a lot of cruisers, it really does come down to the individual player. I would say the outright, like, really good cruisers, and I'm not even going to put these into tiers because I would, again, like, it really depends on the players, right? Like, some players just will not be able to make a certain ship work, so, again, I'm hesitant to kind of do tiers, but if I had to say, like, S-tier cruisers, I would say Leander, and there's a surprising one, right? There's a kind of a surprise. I would say Leander is probably one of the, Leander, maybe even Perth? Because those two are kind of similar, although definitely I think, well, maybe Leander at S and then Perth at like A, maybe. But I would say Leander is definitely one of the really good ones. And it's very interesting how the Leander gets its position. The Leander really gets the spot, at S tier because of her just phenomenal detectability. I mean, here's a ship that has detectability, when you're fully spec'd for it, that's only like a little bit worse than some destroyers, which means that you can actually go ahead and get into certain positions that you wouldn't be able to do with other cruisers. And I would say that, for the Leander, that's just a huge advantage. You can go in there, mess around with destroyers. You have that smoke that you can cover yourself with. Ships decide to get too close to you. You still have those torpedoes. 8 kilometers, a very, very good range. Just overall, very, very good cruiser for ranked. Just because, again, in a ranked environment where, getting caps, contesting caps, and things like that, this is a cruiser that can do it. Other cruisers, for example, that are very good, something like the Cleveland, for example, you don't want to go rushing to cap because no real way to defend yourself when you get spotted, except turning around and running away, which means you could get deleted. So, for me, Leander, definitely one of those S-tier cruisers. Other cruisers, I would say, to be very good, Cleveland, because again, in a ranked environment, you're able to stick much more with a fleet, and Cleveland has a couple of huge advantages. One of them, absolutely phenomenal AA. So with Cleveland on your team, you're not really all that worried about carriers on the other team. You're going to be able to mess up their planes, no problems asked. You have great firepower in the form of 1252 millimeter rapid firing gun, so that's really good. Range is a little iffy there, but again, when you're with a team and you're not the primary target, you should be able to do fine. Cleveland also has pretty trollish armor at times. If you angle well and you get into those sort of auto-bounce territories, you can actually bounce some pretty big shells, just like, whoa, how did I bounce that? Citadel for the Cleveland, if you look at it, the lesser armored parts are actually very much underwater. So I would say Cleveland, pretty much up there. I would say maybe between S and A tiers is where I would put the Cleveland. And let's move into, I guess, like the fully A-tier ships now. I think fully A-tier ships, you could probably be looking at, I would say certain ships would fall in that category. Perhaps Perth, again, phenomenal concealment, could be something to go with there. Perth is kind of similar to the Leander, trading away, again, that one smoke for the other. So Perth could be an interesting pick, I would say. Maybe an A-tier ship there. Aside from that, the rest of the cruisers, I would say, would all be maybe lumped together, maybe into the sort of the B tier category. That'd be like your Nuremberg, La Galicienne, the de Grasse, Molotov, Bodioni, Aoba. Those would all pretty much, I think, be lumped into that B tier. Where, again, if you're a good player with those ships, you could probably make them work. I mean, tier 6 cruisers as a whole, overall, are reasonably being the key word, reasonably well balanced. They all sort of provide their own sort of unique little thing going for them. For example, if you wanted a bit of a longer range, fire starter, you could trade Bodioni in for, or so the Cleveland for the Bodioni, perhaps, for a little bit more of that longer range fire support spam. Nuremberg has become kind of interesting now just because of that HE buff. That could be something to think about there. The de Grasse, the Duca d'Aosta, for example, they have relatively trollish armor at times. They got that spaced armor that can do some weird black hole magic to shells. So things that you could consider, perhaps. But I don't really think any cruiser at tier 6 would be outright like trash tier. Most of them have something that they can play with. So I would say that's pretty much what you'd go for. Now, moving away from cruisers and looking at destroyers, I think here it's a lot more clear. Right now, destroyer-wise at tier 6, there is quite clear superior destroyers to everything else. So I would say right now, if you're looking at, let's say, the Japanese destroyers, there's a destroyer line that normally doesn't get much love, but destroyers like the Shinonome, for example, this is now like your S-tier destroyers. Phenomenal torpedo firepower. And As with most ranked things, especially because at tier 6, stealth, torpedoes, those are lethal combinations, especially when you don't have many carriers, because, Cleveland's eradicate carriers from the queue. But, when you don't have carriers, having stealth, having lethal torpedoes is a huge thing, and the Shinonome just has that, fantastic torpedoes, do great damage. And she does pack some gunfire power as well in the form of 627mm guns. Where other destroyers, if you really want to go pick a fight with her, you're probably going to get hurt a little bit as well. Aside from the Shinonome, I would say the alternative on the Japanese line would probably be the Fubuki. Again, very, very similar reasons, just, great torpedo firepower. 9 of these 610mm torpedoes that go 10 kilometers at 59 knots and do good damage. I mean, Fubuki, Shinonome, I think those are your pretty top, sort of S-tier destroyers. The only other one I can think that would even be close in that category would probably be the Anshan. And I think the Anshan, for me, would be like the A-tier destroyer for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, she does have some pretty reasonable stealth. So this is a ship that has pretty good stealth. She's got really good guns, again, very similar to the Russian destroyer. She's got pretty solid guns that, you can engage in gunfights with other destroyers with. She has workable torpedoes, although they don't have that punch, and this is what prevents her from really being among one of the S-tier destroyers. I would say if the Anshan had maybe quadruple launchers, she'd be closer to that S-tier, maybe even between S and A. Good speed, 38 knots, but yeah, solid destroyer overall, just doesn't have enough of those torpedo punch, really, I would say, to fully be up there, because the destroyers in tier 6, torpedoes, if you have the range and the damage, I mean, that's a huge thing, just because CVs aren't, don't have the same kind of power at tier 6 as you would see in like a tier 8 ranked game. So for me, yeah, Anshan pretty good, probably an A-tier destroyer. Moving down, we have B-tier destroyers, and B-tier destroyers, I would say the Gade would probably be the one down here at the B tiers. Again, here's a destroyer that's got some tools to work with, better torpedoes than what the Anshan has in terms of just number of them, as well as, speed. They have the same range, so good torpedoes. Has the kind of useful hydroacoustic search, which could be used to screen against destroyers like Fubuki and Shinonome. But again, what lets the Gade down really is the fact that her detectability range is a little bit on the high side, at 7.6. And I feel like that prevents her from really being a destroyer that people would just go and pick, like, straight out. Her gun choices does offer a little bit of an interesting selection there. I mean, the 150s are kind of interesting. But, just not a ship that I would say would be, like a best pick kind of thing for tier 6 ranked right now. And then outside of the Gade, everything else at tier 6 to me is pretty much going to be in that trash tier category. Farragut, a great random destroyer, not so great in ranked. You just don't have that torpedo range. 6.4 kilometers is just woefully inadequate. And if you want to be a gunboat, there are just better gunboats around. So Farragut, probably trash tier. Nyevny, same thing, trash tier. You have the same kind of guns as the Anshan, but like 4-kilometer torpedoes. Like, who the heck really wants to use that? And even if you get those fully upgraded, I mean, they're still 4 kilometers. You just have to go a bit faster. So Nyevny, definitely a no-go for me. Another trash tier destroyer. The only other interesting destroyer is probably the Hatsuharu, just because Hatsuharu has, some of the best detectability. But yeah, I mean, compared to the Shinonome Fubuki with their glorious, torpedo firepower, and then you compare to the actual gunboats where they have very workable guns, the Hatsu just doesn't really excel in either one of them. And I would say Hatsu, maybe a lot more situational, maybe like a B-tier destroyer if you're somebody who can really maximize that advantage in stealth, but otherwise, probably better to take something else. Anyways, folks, that pretty much wraps up this Tier 6 ranking of all the ships at Tier 6 for Ranked. Let me know what you think. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know in the comment section below. Aside from all that, folks, take care. Have yourselves a good one. And I am going to go back to suffering in my apartment because the AC died. So, until next time, folks. Talk to you all soon.